Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the book of Samuel 2, Shmuel Bet. Today we will study the chapter 13. In chapter 12, we read of the aftermath of the sin of David with Bathsheba. But just the beginning of the aftermath. It's going to continue to spiral out of control pretty much for the rest of David's career and cause much difficulties. And this next episode is, which we're about to read in chapter 13, is one of the most difficult and one of the most jarring and disturbing. So, but it is important for us to understand, absorb this, and realize the consequences of sin and the enduring consequences on a family when someone does something like what David did before. So David had come to admitted his faults, he suffered the loss of a son, and now we're about to learn how this affects the rest of the family. And here we go. It was after this. The verses deliberately specify, and it was after those events. In other words, as a result of those events that occurred before. Don't think this is just an isolated incident, but once the corruption gets into the family, it becomes pervasive. It grows like a cancerous tumor in the family. Avshalom ben David. And for Avshalom, the son of David, Achos Yafa, he had a beautiful sister, Ushma Tamar. Her name was Tamar. Vaye'ehaveh Amnon ben David. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Where this term here is a sexual infatuation with her. Now, the way it's worded here is interesting because it says Avshalom, the son of David, had a sister. And so one would presume that it would be Amnon's sister as well. But it's presented here because Amnon is Avshalom's brother. So one could understand it in all sorts of ways. Why is it presented as if she is Avshalom's sister? And clearly, as we'll see from the events about to unfold, that Avshalom had a specific a relationship with her, and to the extent that he took care of her and so on. So maybe she was called his sister because he was closer with her, as opposed to Amnon, who had just had this sexual infatuation and eventually is going to come to hate her. The other understanding, and there's a rabbinic tradition, of course, that possibly she was halachically, maybe not really a sister because she could have been born to a mother that had converted, and she may have been born prior to the conversion. That is an interesting tradition, which also answers some of the problems. But on the surface, it would sound like she may have been a sister, a maternal sister to Avshalom, so only a half sister to Amnon, which is possible. Or maybe she was born of a woman who married into the family, but she may have been born even to a different father before she came into David's household, which is another possible suggestion. But any one of these suggestions, none of this is evident from the verses themselves. And since in this podcast, for those of you that have been studying with me, I'm trying to portray the impression that the verses themselves are trying to portray. And in that sense, the most accurate portrayal, I believe, is to say that she was a sister to both of them, but she was closer to Avshalom in a normal sisterly way, and Amnon was looking upon her as a sexual object. So Vayetzer li Amnon lihitchalot ba'avor Tamar achoto. And it pained Amnon to the extent that he got lovesick because of his sister Achoto. Now here in this verse, it reminds us that she is Amnon's sister as well. Kivitulahi, because she was a virgin. And in this extent, She was an unattached young girl who was very pretty, and Amnon desired her tremendously. Vayipole be'eni Amnon and lasot la ma'uma. But it seemed to Amnon that it was too far from him. There's no way he could ever actually uh, um, act upon this desire and do anything to her. So because of the politics of a household, she was a sister. There was no way it could happen. Amnon Reya, however, Amnon had a friend, Ushmo Yonadav ben Shim'a. He was his name was Yonadav. He was his cousin, because he was the son of Shim'a, Achi David, the son of Shim'a, who was David's brother. Yonadav ish chachamod, and Yonadav was a smart, intelligent, or in this context, the translation "clever," a very clever man is a better, better understanding, because the advice he's about to give him is not exactly smart in any sense, other than in being an idea to bring about something which was not good to begin with. So Vayomer lo madua ata kocha dal ben hamelech baboker. And he said to Yonadav, said to Amnon, why is it you, my prince, my ben hamelech, that why are you so distraught and so depressed every morning? Hello, Tagidli, tell me what's going on. Vayomer lo Amnon et Tamar achot Avshalom achi ani ohev. Tamar, the sister of Avshalom Achi, again, it emphasizes that she was somehow more the sister of Avshalom than the sister of Amnon. Ani Ohev, I love her, right? I desire her. Vayomer lo Yehonadav, and I'm using the term love in reference to desire, not actual real love or care or concern between Amnon and his sister. Vayomer lo Yehonadav. So Yonadav said, Shechaval mishkavcha, I'll give you a trick. How in this household you can finagle a situation where the two of you will be alone and possibly do with her what it is that you wanted to do. So lie down in your bed, v'hitchal, and pretend you are ill. Uva avicha lirotacha, and certainly your father will come to visit you. V'yamarta ilav, and he will say, and you will say to him, Tavona Tamar achoti, bring Tamar my sister. V'tavreni lechem, and let her give me some food to eat. V'yastal le'eni et habirya, and she can make for me the food that is meant to make me healthy, some kind of a food that they would cook for a person who is ill. L'man asher ereh, so that I can see as she cooks it. V'yachalti miyada, and she can feed to me. I will eat it from her. So in this way, you can make a situation that you'll have her alone. You can talk to her and maybe convince her to sleep with you. So Amnon followed his advice. He lied down. He pretended he was sick. And the king came to see him. And Amnon said to the king, Tavona Tamar achoti, bring Tamar my sister, utilabev le'enai shtei levivos, and let her knead for me two cakes, v'yaver miyada, and then I will become I can eat from her hands. Vayishlach David el Tamar habayta le'mar. So David sent for Tamar, saying as follows: L'china beis Amnon achicha, please go to your brother's house, v'asilo habirya, and make him the food that he needs to become healthy. Vatelach Tamar beit Amnon achicha, v'hu shochev. And Tamar went to his home, the home of Amnon, her brother, and he was lying in bed. Vatikachet abatzek, and she took the dough. Vatolosh, and she kneaded it. Vatelabev le'enav, and she baked it in front and kneaded it into before him with vatvashela talavivot, and she cooked these cakes of some sort. Vatikachet hamasreis vatitzok lefanav. And she took out the masreit. Masreit is some kind of a cooking device, like a pan or something, and she set out them before him. Vayima'en lechol, but he refused to eat. Vayomer Amnon, and Amnon said, Otziu chalish me'alai, I want to be alone. Let everyone leave the room. Vayetzu chalish me'alav, and everyone left. So it was just Amnon and Tamar. Vayomer Amnon el Tamar, and Amnon said to Tamar, Havi'i habirya hacheder, bring the Birya, the food, to my inner room, my bedroom. Ve'evrem yadech, and I will eat the food from your hands, and you can feed me. Vatikach Tamar talevivot asher asata, and she took the cakes. Vatavela Amnon achia achedra, and she came to her brother Amnon to the inner room. Vatagesh elav le'echol, and she approached him to eat, um, to feed him, right? Vayechazek ba, and he grabbed her. Vayomer and he said, Boi shichvi imi achoti, come lie down with me, my sister. So, at first, demanding that she does it, supposedly willingly. Vatomer lo al achi al ta'aneni, and she said, Al achi, no, my brother, al ta'aneni, do not force me to lie with you. Ki lo ye'asechein bi-Yisrael. Such things are not done in Israel. Al ta'aseh et hanavala hazot. Do not do this disgusting thing. These words are almost a direct quotation from the same words that Shimon and Levi, that Simon and Levi used in Genesis, when Dinah, their sister, was taken by by Shechem ben Hamor. They also use these terms, Lo ye'asechem Yisrael. Such things are not done in the people of Israel. And they also use the same term of calling it Lasot et hanevalah hazot, to do this terrible, disgusting thing. So this indicates, of course, that that story, the story of the Torah, was something that the people frequently spoke and frequently used in David's times, because that tradition was in the family and within the people. But also the same idea that she's probably trying to invoke that story to convince Amnon to cease and desist from what he's about to do. This kind of act, forcing someone unwillingly, and raping someone, is something that should not be acceptable. Va'ani, and then she appealed to his sense of justice. What will be the result if we did this? If you did this to me, Vani anna olichet cherpati, where will I bring my shame? And this reminds us just the awful situation of any woman after being forcibly raped. Where can I go with my shame? I will be ashamed. I will always be considered, somehow damaged goods, so to speak. And where am I going to go to? How can I take this shame? This is going to ruin my life, and there's no place for me to run. It's something that will always be in my past if you do this, and that's me. Viata, and you, Amnon, Yisrael. You'll just be like any one of the low lives, any one of the good for nothings in the people of Israel. After now you're a prince. After you do this, you're just going to be just a rapist, just a low life, and nothing. Viata daberno al hamelach, and here, the best understanding of this is she's saying this just as a way to get out of this situation, but it's difficult fully to understand what she's about to say. Speak to the king, ki lo yimna'eni mimeka. He won't hold me back from you. In other words, if you really want me so bad, talk to the king, and we'll arrange a marriage. Now, remember, she is his sister, so it's hard to imagine that David would somehow allow a marriage of his two of his children to each other, and it could, due to the incestual nature of such a relationship, which is where those ideas that I mentioned before about how she may not have been technically his sister, all those suggestions come about from this statement. But another way of understanding this statement is she didn't really mean that it could happen. She was just saying it in order to get out of the situation, to avoid what's about to occur. He refused to listen, this is verse 14, to her entreaties, to her voice, to what she was asked, what she was trying to convince him. And he overpowered her, and he raped her, and he lay with her. So he committed this terrible deed, and the verse doesn't mince words at all. The verse says and describes exactly what he had done. So there's no doubt as to what had occurred. And immediately, as we often find in these kind of cases, um, the hatred that Amnon and the guilt that Amnon felt for himself, instead of recognizing his own mistake and attempting to the extent that it's even possible to own up to his mistake and repair it, he transferred that hatred and anger against her. Amnon Amnon then hated her with a tremendous amount of hatred. The verses here are really describing a phenomenon which we are all too familiar with in these kind of cases, where the perpetrator blames the victim. The perpetrator starts to hate the victim and transfers all of his hatred and anger against her. Just the awful unfairness and suffering that he caused, that he did, he now aims and blames on her, and it causes him to hate her. Because the hatred that he hated to her was greater than the love that he had loved her before. In other words, all that desire that he had before has now turned into a hate that was much, much stronger even than the desire that he had before. Vayomer lo Amnon, kumi lechi. And Amnon said to her, get out of here. Vatomer lo, as if it was somehow her fault. Vatomer lo halodos hara'ah hagdolah hazos. And then she said to him, understanding and knowing the situation that she was in, and the difficulty of the situation for her, and understanding that the position that she would be in from here on in. At this point, the victim of rape knows she's damaged goods. She's never going to be able to find the kind of spouse that would have been appropriate for her, having had this event. That's the world that they lived in. That's how things worked. Now she's not going to be able to find, as she used to be, a virgin princess who's going to get for herself a marriage with a great prince of some sort. But now she's damaged goods. So she says, what you're doing to me now, throwing me out, is even worse than the original sin. Right? 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 It's even, in other words, now you're sending me out. That's even worse than what you did to me by sending me out. In other words, now own up to what you did, take responsibility, and stick with me, support me, and possibly marry me, right? So that at least I'll have that, right? V'lo avol ishmo Allah, but he refused to listen to her. So he rejected her. Vayikra et na'aro misharso, and he called his servant who served him. Vayomer, and he said to him, Shilchu no et zot me'alai, get rid of this thing. Like he didn't even call her a human, didn't even call her a person. Get this away from me, achutza, get it outside. U'no'ol hadelat achareh, and lock the door behind her. Just get her out of here. And then v'oleha kitonet pasim, and she was wearing a kitonet pasim, a colorful garment. This is the exact term that's used to describe the kitonet pasim that Joseph was given by his father. So she was wearing a kitonet pasim. Kichein tilbashna benot hamelach, because this is how the king's daughters, right, would dress. Habetulot me'ilim, the ones that were virgins would wear these cloaks. Vayotzei osam misharso hachutz v'no'al hadelat achareha, and then he locked the door behind her. So the servant took her outside, locked the door behind her, and she went away. So now we will let me just read one more verse, verse 19. Vatikach Tamar Ephra al Rosha, and she put ashes upon her head. Uketonet hapasim asher aleh akra'ah, and she tore this beautiful cloak that she was wearing. Vatasem yada al Rosha, and she put her hand on her head. Vatelech halochu za'aka, and she went walking and crying, in ashamed and downtrodden, depressed. Vayomer eleha Avshalom achiha. Actually, well, I think from verse 20, we're going to read in the next half of this chapter 13, and we will read as this terrible event that we just read will let the the awful, awful event and its consequences. Let that sit in your mind until we study the second half of the chapter and see how the story just continued to devolve into worse and worse strife and chaos in the house of David. All starting with the terrible decision that David had made to commit the sin with Bathsheba and the cover-up, etc. Thank you so much for studying this together with me. I know sometimes some of these chapters are very difficult and troubling to read, but it's important for us to process the terrible, terrible horror and pain of an event like this. These are things which we are much better off confronting and reading about than putting off aside and pretending they don't exist. Thank you so much. Looking forward to studying the rest of the book of Samuel together, and of course, many, many more books of the prophets.